the Crypt.
Hello, boys and ghouls. Welcome to episode 63 of Dads from the Crypt, Tales from the Crypt podcast. My name is Jason, and today I'm joined by Jody.
Hello.
Mondo's feeling under the weather, but we have a very special guest for tonight. Her name is Heather Wixon. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here and to chat about Tales from the Crypt.
Yeah, so you've been on the show before, but to talk about your book. And now you're here back to talk about volume 2, but we're going to tease that a little bit and get to the meat of that one. But why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So basically I have been working in the world of horror entertainment journalism now for 15 years. And I am the managing editor over at dailydead.com. I have contributed pretty regularly over at Fangoria on both their website and in their magazines. And yeah, I am an author of the book series Monsters, Makeup, and Effects. And right now I'm actually on a little bit of a sabbatical from Daily Dead because I'm actually working on a different book that will get revealed early next year, which is pretty epic. But the only thing I can really tease on that one is it's super cool. And I get to work on it with one of my very best friends, who is Patrick Bromley. So
very cool.
Nice.
Yes, but I think horror fans will be excited.
Awesome. All right, and then I can't remember if we talked about this last time, but do you have any favorite Tales from the Crypt episodes?
Oh my goodness, we did talk about this last time, but I'm like,
yeah, it was like a year ago. I don't remember exactly, so we can talk about it again.
Time anymore,
or we can come back to that when we do our other questions if you want.
Let's do that then, because I actually have it written down somewhere, I think, from our chat last time. So I'm going to cheat a little bit because I always prep for my own interviews and stuff like that. So
yeah, we put out a call for questions and people always ask our favorite Tales episodes. So we'll get to that in a little bit. So let's dive into it. Actually, no, we have announcements. Don't want to figure out announcements. All right. So Sunday, October 30th at noon Pacific time, West Coast time, we are hosting a live Q&A with Al Katz and Gil Adler and possibly other friends. It's just gonna be time to hang out. It's kind of our Halloween Q&A. We will give out details on our social media about how to log in, but it should be a good time. Start thinking of your questions. Al and Gil have been in the industry for decades, working on everything from Tales to Freddy's Nightmares to Superman Returns. So get your questions ready and mark your calendars again, October 30th at noon. Also, Al has been doing a series of interviews with Steve D'Souza. You might not know his name, but you know his work. He wrote movies such as 48 Hours, Commando, Die Hard. He wrote and directed the Street Fighter movie. And he also did the episode Carrie and Death for Tales from the Crypt, a fan favorite. And I actually got to crash the interview today and ask him some questions about that episode. So by the time this comes out, both halves of the episodes should be out on our feed and Gil and Al's feed. So make sure you check that out. Also, because everyone can't stop talking about Halloween Ends, we're going to be doing a special review for that movie. It'd be me, Mondo, Jody, and we'll probably have Whitney back and maybe one or two other people. We don't have the exact date, but that should be coming out soon. So put it on your awareness for when that comes out to be kind of a surprise release. Okay, but tonight, we're talking well-cooked hams, which I haven't had that much ham, to be honest, in my life. I grew up in a Jewish household. We didn't eat much pork. So I don't know. I don't know if I can tell you what a well-cooked ham is really like, but tonight we're talking about Tales from the Crypt, well-cooked hams. This episode came out November 3rd, 1993. Jody, give us a plot synopsis.
All right. So this is another one of those that we talk about well-cooked hams. I have no idea what that has to do with anything in this. Maybe the vaguest of connections that we can get to later, but yeah, well-cooked hams. We open on the Crypt Keeper learning French with a cassette, and he has a beret, and he's got a mustache and some red wine. I expected to see it's like some big breadsticks and everything. But yeah, it's if you want to go a stereotypical French, you got it. And for a special bonus, he also talks in an accent for at least a little bit. So we get a little bit of French Crypt Keeper. Just wonderful stuff. Now, again, what does French have to do with this? Only something in the comic. Has nothing to do with the episode. But, whatever. It's fun. So we open up into our actual story. We meet a magician whose name is Miles Fetterman. And he's doing his show that is mainly just making fire appear out of his hat. Like that seems to be kind of his main thing. He's saying, rise, rise, trying to get this fire out. And it comes out. And then he tries to make it go away and pulls out a bouquet of flowers that also burst into flames. It's pretty funny little act. It's not supposed to be funny for him, but it is funny to watch. After the show, he gets an argument with his assistant, Greta. And Greta's French accent is so thick, it's barely understandable when she goes into a long time of talking. From what I can pick up, she left another magician named Zorban the Magnificent to work with Miles. And he's kind of doing some of Zorban's tricks, but he's not doing them well. And so she gets into it with him and he fires her. And she says, you will regret this. And so she walks out and he kind of collapses on the ground or on the seat looking defeated. And she comes back in and notices that Miles is wearing a necklace that belonged to Zorban. And Miles said that Zorban gave it to him, but she doesn't believe him. She said, this is a family heirloom. Zorban would never let someone else have it. And so you had to have killed him. No one's seen Zorban in a while. You must have killed Zorban. And he kind of confesses. He kind of does it over the top in that way that you could kind of say was joking. She says she's going to police, but he doesn't. There's no evidence. And so Miles talks to the poster of Zorban in his dressing room and says he'll do anything to get the magic as a man listens outside the window. And as Greta is leaving, that man steps out in front of her from the shadows and says her name. And it just kind of cuts away from there. We see Miles on stage later with two new assistants, once again, pulling burning flowers out of a hat, while that same mysterious man is watching from the audience. And he comes into Miles' dressing room after the show and says his name is Franz Kragen. Now, Kragen says Miles' show is interesting, and he says, I'm an illusionist too. Why don't you come watch my show? And he says, he gives him a flyer and says, I'm going to leave your name at the ticket office. That's the only way to get in. And the flyer says that Kragen will appear with the famous box of death. So at Kragen's show, a coffin is revealed that he calls the box of death, and he goes to elaborately describe what's going to happen. There's all these knives and swords that are hanging up from the ceiling, and he points all of them out and shows how when a cord is pulled, those knives and swords stab into this box. You actually see them go all the way into it. And then he gets sulfuric acid and puts it in a little cup up above. First, he demonstrates that it is real sulfuric acid. He puts the flour in it and it shrivels up. He puts it up above so that it's going to dump on him in there. And then he lights a candle that's going to burn the rope. And so he takes off his shoes, he gets handcuffed, and he gets put inside a big bag. And the candle is burning away the rope that holds the swords in place. While he's in the box, Kragen starts yelling that something went wrong and he wants out. And about that time, the rope snaps, the blades fall, and they stab into the box. His assistant runs over and opens the box, and you see Kragen just stab through with all these swords. And the crowd, it's all screaming, and Kragen runs out of the box covered in blood. And then he says, stay in your seats. And he stands up. He's totally unharmed. It's all just an act. It's a trick. And the audience loves it. They cheer, and Miles cheers, and everyone is impressed. So later, Miles talks with Kragen in his dressing room and asks him how he did it. And he says, well, there's a double door. So in the back, I can scoot back, and this door moves out of the way. And I'm out of harm's way. So when the swords come in, they just miss me. And there's makeup inside the sack, and the acid he was also handcuffed. The acid burns the handcuffs and the lock so that I can get free from all of that. And Kragen starts to demonstrate how it works in the sack. And Miles stands up and slowly picks up a knife, but he's standing in front of a mirror. And so Kragen can see him holding the knife in his hand. And he asks him what he's doing and realizes that what Miles is trying to do is steal his act. And when Kragen won't tell him how everything works, Miles stabs him, wraps him up in the sack. So later, back in Miles' dressing room, his assistants tell him they have a full house, and this man named Thomas Miller comes in with a camera and says he's there to make a video of the performance. Now, video is a new thing, but the whole point is that he can take his act and show it in theaters, so he'll be so much more famous because of it. And so Miles checks with his assistants to make sure everything is ready before going on stage, and Greta sneaks in, the old assistant. She just kind of comes back again, sneaks in through the back door, and she tampers with the box so that the back panel, that spring-loaded panel that moves out of the way, won't move out of the way. And so Miles goes through the same act as Kragen did, but kind of more clumsy version of it. Like his little fire trick doesn't work, and he doesn't really explain things. He's not much of a showman. But he gets inside the box, and he uses the key to open the lock on top of the sack, puts some makeup on, which, I mean, it just looks like he's throwing oatmeal on his face. Like there's nothing. When Kragen did it, there was blood everywhere. Miles just shoved some oatmeal on his face, and that's his makeup there. He sees that the back panel isn't moving. He's trying to push, and he starts yelling for help, but everyone thinks it's part of the act. And the swords drop, and the assistants open the door, and Miles is there just like stabbed through with all the swords. He says something went wrong, and he begs for a doctor. And while this is all going on, Greta takes over on the camera as Thomas Miller walks up on stage. And he says, "Your version of the box is going to make me and Greta very rich." And that's when Miller reveals that he is actually Kragen. Kragen wasn't really dead. And then he also reveals, in a double twist, that he was also Zorban the Magnificent. And so Miles tried to kill them both, but couldn't pull it off. They're back, and Miles dies on stage, and the audience just roars with applause over something. Honestly, the final magic act is very confusing as to what the audience is seeing. Like, they see a man die on stage, they see a man spin around twice, like, I'm a different person, now I'm another different person, and they all cheer, and that's the end. I don't know. I don't know how this end works. I don't know why the audience thinks it's so great. I'm assuming the camera was so that he can show this in theaters all over the world, like he had said he was going to, but a performance of a man dying while the man reveals himself to be two other people that you've never heard of.
Right. And they never really set up like what era this is until we'll get into in a minute. But yeah, it's very confusing.
But anyway, that's the final act. Ta-da, the end.
All right, Heather, you're our guest, so you can go first. What did you think of this episode?
Well, it's interesting because I actually back in the days when like Tales from the Crypt was actually airing, I only really got to watch like the first 3 seasons pretty regularly because I had friends who were like recording it for me, and then like once I got to high school, like I moved, so I didn't have the same like friends and stuff like that, so I kind of had fallen off at this point that season 5 was airing. So it's interesting to me because this was one I hadn't seen before. I mean, it's hard for me to completely dislike anything that involves Billy Zane or Martin Sheen,
right?
I mean, especially considering Billy Zane would go on to then do Demon Knight a few years later. But it's a little underwhelming, if I'm being honest.
No, please be honest.
I mean, I love period piece storytelling and things like that, where you can see that they put the time into the sets, and they were trying to sort of establish this atmosphere of like mystery and intrigue with like these magicians. But I think it's because of how complicated those last like 5 to 7 minutes are. It kind of takes you out of the story a little bit. At least it did for me. So I liked it, but I didn't totally love it.
Jody.
Yeah, this is a particularly messy episode, it feels like. Like there's definitely good stuff. Billy Zane's always good. Martin Sheen and all of his various roles is good. Although his Kragen character suffers from the same problem that Greta has, of an accent so thick you can barely understand it. Like it's a lot.
You know what his accent reminded me of the inspector from Young Frankenstein that no one can understand with the fake arm. I kept thinking of that guy.
Yeah. No, there are definitely elements like Heather said. I love the sets. It's a good looking episode. The trick, and when Kragan explains it and he goes through kind of in detail explaining all the different parts that are going to happen, that's cool. But I mean, the end, I'm just real confused about what even was happening. Like, okay, I get that Miller was Kragan, was Zorbin. I have to keep all these names straight. I get that. And they're getting revenge. Okay, cool. I just don't get what the performance was at the end. Like, I don't get what everyone was cheering for. Yay, a man died on stage and you're a lot of different people. Okay. It's very confusing.
The world's
like,
first snuff film.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I was like, so that would be like an illegal thing to like try to go out and promote your show in a theater.
Right.
Like
Well, this is interesting considering it's by the writer of 8mm.
So this is essentially the prequel to 8mm.
Yes, this is
Okay.
4mm.
Right? Makes sense.
But yeah, so it's a confusing episode. The script is sloppy for Tales from the Crypt episode, because normally by the time it comes to the end, it's all nice and tight and everything's kind of tied up in a bow. I don't think it quite achieved that. I feel like maybe I see the other credits this writer has. He has some good credits.
Mhm.
So maybe this was him kind of getting his feet wet, getting started, and just definitely not. I feel like a lot of the problems with this one have to do with the story. We'll get to the comic in a minute, but one of the rare occasions I wish they'd stuck closer to the comic story.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start off with that. So this is written by Andrew Kevin Walker, who did the 7 8mm Sleepy Hollow. This is his first, at least IMDb credited writing project, and I see where he was going from what the comic was, how he was trying to simplify, but I think in trying to simplify, he actually made it more complicated, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
By trying to simplify, but I think he took too much out.
Yeah.
And that just kind of fell through a little bit. It's interesting because this is also directed by Elliot Silverstein, who did like original episodes of the Twilight Zone in the 60s. He did a bunch of Crypt episodes. He did Reluctant Vampire and Curiosity Killed, which are 2 very good episodes and very well directed, very clear episodes. So it's interesting that this is, at least plot wise, one of the lesser ones. The performances are really, what makes this really watchable. Again, Billy Zane is amazing. I love Billy Zane's sneaky horror resume. I mean, he was like, his first film was like one of Biff's guys in Back to the Future, fine, but then the second movie's Critters. He had like a stint doing Twin Peaks episodes, Tombstone, Demon Knight, The Phantom, and then of course Titanic. And then we have Martin Sheen in this kind of like weird place in his career in the 90s, where he he's already done a lot of his earlier stuff in the 70s and 80s, and this is pre-West Wing. So he starts off with Apocalypse Now, but now in the 90s he's doing stuff like this and Spawn. He's kind of going out there a little, more experimental phase in a way. But then of course he gets to West Wing, which I'm a huge fan of, and then now he's doing Frankie and Grace, another great show. Then we have Greta, played by Maryam D'Abo, who was a Bond girl in The Living Daylights and a bunch of other projects he's done. So it's a really, really good cast. And I think, again, this is one of those things where the cast is elevating a script that has issues, but but Martin Sheen's so over the top doing all these crazy accents. It makes it really, really watchable, where like I almost wish Martin Sheen would do a little more off the wall things like this. He kind of plays not uptight, but more dignified character. And I kind of want to see him let loose a little more.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely tell that he seems to be having fun with it. Like he's having a good time. He's being silly. Billy Zane too.
Yeah,
like,
Billy Zane.
This is like a test run for all the craziness that he goes for in Demon Knight,
Yeah, exactly. I also wish they set like a more of a time period. Like you literally only have like 3 sets that they're using: the stage, the back room, and then someone else's back room kind of thing. So like it didn't even occur to me that this wasn't contemporary until they brought out that camera. Like, to me, I thought it was your basic, because lots of Crypt Tales at least takes place like in the 40s and the 50s, and this is like obviously earlier than that.
I think the old timey people in the crowd was what tipped me off that were
Yeah.
sleeping.
Okay.
Like when I saw the old guy, like with his like very old timey sort of clothing on, I was like, oh, okay, so this isn't 20th century at all. I think we're still in the
Okay. Yeah. Maybe
Yeah.
I just didn't notice that, but yeah, it didn't feel very grounded.
Yeah.
And,
No, I mean, it definitely could have used a little like, it doesn't tell you like really like, is this like in like a city? Is this outside? Like there's no sort of for a show that's about like performing on a stage, it doesn't set a stage.
Yeah.
And also I thought the necklace was going to be a thing, was going to play into it,
Oh,
and that
yeah.
never comes back.
Yeah,
And
I
I
forgot.
like-
Until he
At
takes
the
it.
end, he takes it at the end, and the audience cheered.
Yeah.
Like they knew this backstory.
I don't know. Yeah, I feel like that was going to have a backstory to it. And then Billy Zane's character keeps trying to do the same trick over and over again, but I'm like, you're an illusionist. Why you have control over what's happening?
Right. This hat's out of control.
Yeah. So either it's magic and he needs to work on his magic, or it's illusion, he needs to work on his technique. So it doesn't seem like he just keeps doing the same thing over and over again. And
Flowers.
suddenly he has twins
uncontrollable.
for his assistants. They never.
I don't know where they came from. Like
Yeah.
he fired Greta, and then immediately the next show, there's 2 assistants that just popped
Yeah,
up.
like he has if he like, obviously he's the type of guy who was probably trying to pinch a penny. So why does he suddenly need 2 assistants?
Well, I mean, they are twins, so maybe they were just a package deal.
Yeah.
You got a 2 for 1 or something.
I won't work without my sister.
Right.
Probably back then, you got to
Yeah.
keep the act together.
I will say the trap design was actually pretty cool with the swords and the acid. It was very Saw. This is like that's what we need. We need a Victorian Saw movie.
Oh man, like the super prequel to Saw.
Yeah, kind of like how Prey was, 200, 300 years in the past. They need a Victorian Saw.
I would watch that. I would
Like
absolutely watch
John
that,
Kramer's ancestors are
Mhm.
torturing people.
Mhm.
I'm in.
Yeah, then we got something here. But yeah, it just the triple twist is okay. It's again watching Martin Sheen doing it is just kind of mind blowing in and of itself, but it doesn't really like he doesn't really notice that any of these 3 people look the exact same except for like, facial hair.
Well, and the final reveal that he's actually, I can always forget the name, Zorbin.
Zorbin.
Zorbin's a character that was like mentioned at the beginning. Like I think it's supposed to be real shot. Oh, it's him. But we don't know anything about him. I think it's the same thing. Like we're supposed to react like that audience did, where there's all this backstory that we need to understand what's happening at the end. I just don't feel like we get enough of it. I feel like if this audience is really applauding at the end, they had to have gotten like a big leaflet that when they sat down, like, let me explain why this guy's an asshole. And then, at the end, the big reveal, okay, yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I feel like what we needed was like even like a 60-second flashback.
Sure.
To him and Zorbin working together, or him being Zorbin's understudy, and that would show like why, like if Zorbin was treating him like crap, it would show why he resented him and killed him and took the necklace. Like you could do that in 60 seconds, really quickly.
Yeah.
With the same set, the same makeup and everything.
Yeah, I think they were thinking that the Zorbin posters in the dressing room were going to do all the heavy lifting in this episode,
Mhm.
but I don't think so because
No.
if you're a sort of known magician in those times, like everybody probably had a poster.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, and the poster doesn't establish the relationship between the 2, and that's what was missing.
Yeah.
It almost feels like there's too much story and not enough story at the same time. Like there's a lot going on, but it doesn't really all come together and leaves a lot.
And then
of
the
things.
triple twist is that all along it was just the perfect amount of story.
Right.
Yeah. Like, yeah, and the fact that this Miller guy shows up at the exact moment he's going to do this crazy stunt, and the Miller guy looks exactly like the other 2 people. Like, come on.
Yeah, but how could you tell? Because one of them talks like this and the other one talks like this. It's completely different.
Yeah,
Like,
totally different.
although I don't think Zorbin had an accent, so he didn't even notice that Miller showed up and had the same voice as his former boss.
He had like a British accent, I think, like for like the 2
Sure.
lines that he had. Yeah, again, if they
The
would
2
have shown
lines.
us something with him beforehand, they could have established that character, but we didn't care about Zorbin.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun to watch Billy Zane do Billy Zane stuff though, and
Mhm.
Martin Sheen slum it for a little bit.
Right.
Well, I think
Right.
that's what makes like Tales from the Crypt so fascinating, is that
Mhm.
because it became this sort of zeitgeist thing that
Yeah.
attracted all levels of talent, where like, because like every like 4 or 5 weeks, like on Twitter, there's always the picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger hanging out with Crypt Keeper that makes the
Mhm.
rounds, and everyone's like all impressed about it, even though that picture literally makes the rounds like constantly. But
Yeah.
that was like the thing back then. Like
Mhm.
you could put somebody like Tom Hanks or Arnold Schwarzenegger with Crypt Keeper, and like that was like a thing, and it was cool. And so like I think it actually everybody kind of wanted to do it because it was sort of a break from the norm,
Right.
especially considering the other types of TV that were going on at that time.
Yeah, and
So
I think both those actors were kind of on a slight lull in their career. Again, this is right before Martin goes on to do The West Wing. Is right before Billy Zane gets Phantom and Demon Knight and then Titanic, all like bam, 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 one year after another. So I think that telescope is kind of like a rehab place in the way to at least like
Get
do
your name
something
back out
fun to
there
get your name,
again.
to keep your name in the news.
you got to admit it's kind of a miracle, and I'm not saying this because I dislike the movie or not or anything, but because it just wasn't so well received and it kind of didn't do a whole lot. But it's kind of amazing that the Phantom didn't kill Billy Zane's career.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Think about it. Because if that movie came out today with like him, like that's a career killer.
Mhm.
Like, and it's fun because I remember seeing it in theaters and thinking it was kind of fun. And I
Mhm.
kind of remember that the McDonald's, or maybe it was
Yeah.
Burger King, somebody had something where they were giving away like Phantom merch. And I remember like friends and I were like, oh, let's go, but yeah, he still got to go on and do Titanic and
Mhm.
Demon Knight and
Well,
all
there
that kind of
was
stuff.
the Phantom and the Shadow. I think were like within a recent
Mhm.
a short amount of time. So but people were just kind of looking at this very niche comic booky thing
Yeah.
that people kind of do, and then it never really hit big until Blade and then X-Men came out.
There were a lot of those like old timey comics. I'm thinking
The
about that now. Like
Rocketeer.
the Rocketeer. That's what I was just thinking.
Yeah.
Like there was a time period where it
Yeah,
was
I think
like,
because the Rocketeer was so popular. I think that's when
right.
they thought,
Mhm.
oh, let's
Maybe
bring back all
so.
these popular, all these like old properties. I think for me, like the reason I actually went and saw The Shadow is because in junior high, one of my English teachers, we would always listen to the old radio episodes of The
Mhm.
Shadow Knows. And
Yeah.
so I was like, wait, I get this, but like, I wasn't anticipating people my age. Most of them even knew what the hell that was.
Yeah.
You
Yeah, no,
know,
I knew the Shadow as a kid because I'm a Southern boy, and Cracker Barrel used to have all these like books on tape that you could get,
oh,
and some
Cracker
of them were
Barrel.
old
Cracker
radio
Barrel.
shows. Yeah, I mean, hey, you eat where you live.
Yeah.
But, they had old radio shows on tape, and so I would get like the Shadow and the Whistler and some of these things, and so I was familiar with the properties, but it's still in the mid '90s to suddenly go, hey, that thing from like 70 years ago? We made a movie about it. I'm sure you kids are excited, right?
Well, also don't forget about Dick Tracy was a big thing too.
I love Dick
Mhm.
Tracy,
I
though.
love
That's
that
true.
movie.
Yeah.
That's true.
That
I just
movie
watched
is
that
good.
a few months ago with my kids. I
Oh,
feel like it holds up. It's a
really?
good comic book movie.
I need
Like
to watch that.
it looks like a comic book, like all the
Mhm.
bright colors and the sets and everything. I think it's cool. I also thought it was cool when I was a kid, though. So
Yeah, I remember the
maybe
marketing for that
nostalgia.
the marketing for that was huge.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I remember like McDonald's did a huge thing with that movie.
Yeah.
Um, so
But
yeah,
I was
go
gonna say
ahead.
really quick though, because you mentioned how like when we were kids, like all these things from 70 years ago. Does it depress you that's like to think about like that's like only the 50s now?
Yeah, a little
I'm
bit.
just like, oh, you mean the stuff that like our parents like when they were born? Okay.
Well, I
I'm
think
just like, oh, all
well, it's
right.
kind of like how the '90s are becoming like the nostalgia
Oldies?
go-to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
it's like,
if you go to Spirit Halloween or like a Party
Mhm.
City or something, they have '90s costumes now. Like
Oh,
literally the stuff we wore in high school is
Well,
available for you to wear as a costume.
I read this book once about the '80s movies and kind of how things go in 20-year cycles, basically.
Mhm.
And especially when there's a decade that's kind of turbulent. So like that's why in the '80s there's so many movies about the '50s, or like where people were like
Mhm.
time traveling back to the '50s. It's like especially Back to the Future, but that was a lot of other movies did that because the '50s were a quote simpler time before the strife of the '60s and Vietnam War and everything. And I think the '90s, at least in the earlier '90s, are kind of have fallen into that like idealistic
Mhm.
lens of like, oh, there's a lot going on, but it was a simpler time before 9/11 and a lot of other things that happened in the towards the late '90s, early 2000s.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So only another 10 years till we're back in the 2000s, and it's just going to be more and
then,
more
like,
depressing.
I'm waiting for the moment when like Hit Me Baby One More Time because like starts playing on the oldies channel, and then I'm done.
Mm,
I'm out. I'm tapped
pain.
out.
Oh
The
my
pain.
God.
But it's true. Like I was just talking about this last night with my other half, and we were saying like, for us growing up, like a lot of the bands that were considered like oldies bands were like, Elvis or the Beatles and things like that, where like now it's like Nirvana, even Soundgarden. And I'm just like, I'm not ready for that, like at all,
Well,
like whatsoever.
I watched the Elvis movie, the new one that just came out a couple weeks
Okay.
ago, and I didn't realize Elvis died when he was like 38.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait,
Yes.
I'm older than Elvis was? That just freaks me out.
Yeah.
All right, before shit gets too real, Jody, why don't you give us your comic comparison?
Okay, like I said, this is one of the ones I actually like the comic better than the episode, I think, story-wise. So this is from Tales from the Crypt number 27, which was September 1951. Script by Al Feldstein, art back by Jack Davis. So you got some of the good ones there. And in this, it's a completely different story. Like there are some connective tissues, but two American producers are in Paris and they witness a Grand Guignol performance of two men on stage, and they're fighting, and one throws acid in the other one's face, and the other one puts his face down on a red hot stove, and they have all these realistic looking gore and burn marks and things like that. And these American producers love it. They love the gory effects. They want to bring it to Broadway. But the problem is the effects are kept secret. And so they want to talk with I guess he's the producer there of the Grand Guignol. His name is Monsieur Mathieu, who says he doesn't, thank you.
Accent.
He doesn't think that this will work in America because it's a family business, and I don't want to reveal all of our secrets for all of the tricks that we do. But then he also says, yeah, and all those secrets are written down and they're in this safe here. And then they leave. Little setup. They sneak back in later that night and they see the producer opening the safe, and it literally says they shoot him in the face and they steal the manuscript. Doesn't show it, but it does say gunshot in his face. The next morning on the plane back to America, they're reading through the manuscript and learning how all the tricks are done. And they say, he got in trouble because he had it all written down. I think we need to memorize the entire document with every bit of makeup effects and tricks, and then we'll destroy the document. Which, I mean, that's something. But back in Paris, Mathieu's body disappears. So the show opens on Broadway. It sells out 5 weeks in advance. And it's opening night. The audience is suitably horrified by everything that's happening. And the two producers are going to act themselves in the finale, which is the acid and red hot stove trick. And midway through the performance, one says, you're kind of overacting, you're screaming too much. And then they both start screaming in pain because the acid is real and the stove is real, and they are getting burned up on stage. And when the audience realizes that it's real, they all run out of the theater in a panic. The two men die on the stage, and there's one person left sitting in the audience. And it makes it clear it is the corpse of Monsieur Mathieu. How does it all work? I don't know, but it's cool. It's a cool image to end on.
Jody, I love your accents.
Thank
so
you.
much.
I took French in high school. I never get to use it.
Yeah, I like that comic a lot. I do wish that they explained why the acid is real, why is it like I was expecting that the twist would be that he intentionally planted fake manuscripts and intentionally used his makeup effect to make it look like he got shot in the face. And then this is all a setup to punish these producers, or did the corpse?
Yeah, I feel like it's got to be
use
something
corpse
supernatural.
magic,
Yeah,
or again, or if he survived, he went there and switched out the acid for real acid and that kind of stuff. They didn't really explain the comic, but it still works.
I mean,
in
I'm
a really
I'm
creepy
kind of
way.
I'm kind of a sucker for anything that's about that Parisian Grand Guignol stuff because it's just really cool. To think that like in the late 1800s and early 20th century, Parisians were all flocking to the theater to watch basically gory special effects and sex. Like that's what they came to see. It just we're all one big human family, and we all like nasty stuff on screen.
So is that like Interview with a Vampire, where that there's the scene where they go to the theater and it's like vampires pretend to be human, pretend to be vampires?
Yeah, with like when Antonio Banderas does that scene, it
Mhm.
still is like the most haunting and terrifying scene I think of the entire movie.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
I don't know who the actress is that is in that moment,
Oh,
but
she's terrifying. Yeah.
my
Or
God,
terrified.
every time I see him, I legitimately am scared for her and just want to like reach into the TV and like be like, I want to help you, but
Mhm.
that's how good that scene is.
Have you guys seen the new the TV show?
I've been DVRing it. I haven't had a chance to start it yet.
Okay. I'm interested.
I've heard pretty good stuff, pretty good things about it, but for me, it's like, I don't know if it's because of like the way the circumstances of me reading the book at the time, like in the 90s and stuff like that, and just interpreting it as these sort of larger than life characters already. And then the
Mhm.
casting of the first movie ends up being like this really big cast
Mhm.
where
Oh,
like
yeah.
I'm looking at the cast of this one and I'm just like, I don't know about this,
Yeah.
but I'm willing to give it a shot.
Yeah, at least it's like a mini series where like because you can take the time to like really develop things, or at least they didn't like do a movie where it's just gonna be a rehash of.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I love that movie.
Nothing's
And
going to
just
make nothing's going to make the impact though of Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt like at their height. Like that.
oh
just
yeah,
makes it
exactly.
stand out even
Yeah,
more.
you can't match that. Or the scene with not Claire Danes,
Kirsten Dunst.
Kristen Dunst, and
I
with
forget
with
the
the
woman who-
sunlight. Oh, that scene
Yes.
is heartbreaking to me every time. Gets me.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. And I mean, especially I think that was like my first. No, actually, I think I saw that because I didn't actually end up getting to see the movie in theaters. I ended up renting it afterwards. So actually, my
Mhm.
first introduction to Antonio Banderas was
Mhm.
Desperado,
Desperado was mine too.
Yeah.
which was
This
a good
is-
introduction.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a cool movie.
And this one also had Sandy Newton.
Yeah.
In
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
other
Very,
scene,
very
yeah.
early in her career.
All right. Well, let's move to our episode rating. We do 1 to 5, obviously 5 being the best, 1 being the worst. You can do half points. Again, Heather, you are our guest. What do you give this episode? Honestly, there's no right or wrong.
Yeah, this seems like so like mean. I think for me, it's like a 3 out of 5.
That's
Like
fair.
honestly, if it had been lesser actors involved, it would
Mhm.
have been lower. But the sheer power of getting to watch Billy Zane do his thing, and then Martin Sheen playing 3 different characters very inexplicably, yet somehow extremely fascinating all the same. I think had it been, 2 other talents involved, sort of like anchoring this episode, I think it would have been less.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's like a 3 out of 5. Like it's something that like if it was somebody who wanted to watch Tales from the Crypt, it wouldn't be an episode I would recommend like right off the bat for them. But I wouldn't tell people who are making their way through the series to skip it either.
Right.
It's
That's
solid.
that's a good way to put that.
It's
But
solid.
Yeah, definitely not skippable.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right, Jody.
Yeah, I'm gonna go just a touch lower because we've seen so many of these. I'm gonna say a 2.5. That's my fine rating. Like
Yeah.
if I'm writing, honestly, if I give something a 2.5, it may actually be a worse insult than if I give it a low rating, just because 2.5 is just it's fine. Like if somebody asked, should I watch this episode? I'd go, yeah, why not? You got nothing better to do. Go, sure. But not, I don't have a whole lot to like praise other than those performances. The performances are great though. So, it's worth watching. Just nothing particularly special in the Tales world.
Yeah, I agree with everything both of you just said. It's definitely not one to run to, but it's not one to run from. So yeah, I'm going with a 3. I'm feeling a little generous tonight. So that's where we're at. Okay, now we'll kick it over to Uncle Al for his anecdotes. Magic of editing. All right, so Mondo's not here tonight, so I'm gonna do song of the day. And usually Mondo goes on the whole roundabouts journey to get us to a place for a song that on face value doesn't really make sense sometimes. But after he explains it, it makes total sense. I'm going to do the exact opposite and pick something very on the nose. I'm going to do Alice in Chains, Man in the Box.
There is a man. There's
a
box.
man and there's a box.
Going with the oldies. I like it.
Oh, God. No.
That's painful.
Take it
Oh,
back.
This is where we're at.
Oh, God.
Oh, what a perfect setup for that.
Yeah. This was recorded in 1989 and released in January 1991. So, yeah, it feels old. It was used in the. I did look up something. This was used in the trailers for, or at least featured in films such as the 1994 version of Lassie, which I need to figure that one out.
Man in the Box was in Lassie.
Apparently,
I
maybe
guess
it was
I
just
need
like
to go watch Lassie now.
on the
What?
radio or something. The Perfect Storm, I can see that. Funny People and Always Be My Maybe from 2019.
Yeah.
Song's got a weird soundtrack history.
I know. It was also used by professional wrestler Tommy Dreamer
Yes.
as his entrance music in Extreme Championship Wrestling from 1995 to 2001.
EC Dub.
And
EC Dub. Sorry, you
Oh.
stumbled into the world of wrestling, and suddenly I was like, yes. please.
Mondo's the
should be
huge.
here.
Yeah, Mondo's the wrestler, so I'm going to do this as a tribute to him.
Gotcha.
Is also used for his promotional work in House of Hardcore.
Yep, that makes sense. That's the company that Tommy Dreamer actually started.
Mm.
Yeah.
All right. Anything fun you can say about Tommy Dreamer?
He's pretty cool. He's been wrestling, gosh, I think for like almost 4 decades now.
Mhm.
My other half actually went to college in Philly, so he used to go to like pretty much every ECW show. We have an entire bookcase of ECW VHS tapes. So it's ECW gets a lot of love in this house. We actually have a poster from like the first show and stuff like that too. But yeah, there is he's one of those good guys that like you're pretty much know at this point nothing bad's going to come up, because he's a guy who's always been very supportive of everybody, who's been always into the business for the right reasons. And you know, he's worked with like WWE, he's worked with Impact, he's worked over in Japan and things like that, and I don't think anybody has a bad thing to say about him. So yeah,
Very cool.
Tommy Dreamer rules.
Cool. All right. Well, that was your song of the day. Don't forget to check out our Spotify playlist where we add all of our songs. All right, Jody, give us some horror news. And Heather, feel free to insert some of your own.
Yeah, I was about to say I feel kind of inadequate here because I'm looking stuff up and like you're in this.
She is the news.
Honestly though, but like I've been like kind of removed because I've been sort of just like pulling back a little bit, where I'm like, yeah, what's going on?
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't really know. Like, I know Smile's doing really well,
Yeah.
which is great. And I think horror this weekend that we're recording this was like 5 out of the 10 top, you know, spots in box office.
Yeah,
which-
it's the season.
The biggest news right now is just there's a ton of stuff coming out. It's all doing well. Here some of the movies coming out, and I don't know all of these. I don't know much about Grim Cuddy, Spirit Halloween the movie, Dark Glasses, which is Argento's new movie.
Mhm.
Halloween Ends obviously just came out. Piggy, the family movie The Curse of Bridge Hollow, Bitch Ass, which is a surprisingly fun movie I watched at Chattanooga Film Fest. Old Man, The Accursed.
Wait, hold on. So I saw the poster for Old Man. It's got Stephen Lang just like looking old and curmudgeon, and I totally thought it was a parody.
No, it's Lucky
thought it was like-
McKee.
Yeah, Lucky McKee.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? I just thought
Yeah.
it was like Steve Lang the movie, colon Old Man.
It might actually be by the time it's done. Yeah, but Mark Center's in it as well too, so that'll be
That's
pretty
awesome.
cool. Yeah, I think that just came out this weekend, if I'm not
Mhm.
mistaken.
Yeah, the Accursed, which is by the people who made Willy's Wonderland.
Ooh.
Mm.
And there's a movie called Some Like It Rare, which is about a man who works at a restaurant and accidentally kills a vegan and serves it to the people, and like they like eating the vegan. I told my friend Allison, who is a vegan, about it, and she was not a fan of that concept, but I thought it sounded fun. We also got a trailer for Megan. That's Megan with a 3. It looks freaking awesome.
I'm
looks-
so in for Megan.
Oh man,
It looks
I'm-
awesome. I almost went to a test screening for it.
Yeah.
But I feel like the trailer gives away too much. It's one of those.
See, we always think that, and then yet
Yeah.
we go to these things and we're like, oh, okay, I think it was okay.
That's
I
what I'm
feel- I-
hoping, but they show
Yeah,
a
'cause-
lot of kills, and I'm like,
To me, the trailer showed me just enough to be excited. Like there's one scene where she's running on all fours chasing somebody.
yeah, that's
and
cool.
it's the freakiest looking thing. But yeah, I'm all in for Megan. Same people who made Malignant for that one. So yeah,
Mhm.
Yeah,
good
I'm in
stuff.
for the Megan dance too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like
Yeah,
she's already
instantly
all over
memeable.
Twitter. Like, I mean, it was like literally 30 seconds after that trailer came out, I saw gifs coming through.
Yep.
And I was like, okay, she's here. And she's beefing with Chucky too. That's news.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's
Which
what?
I'm like, she's beefing with Chucky.
Oh, beefing.
I'm
That's
like,
funny.
On Twitter.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
can be down for that.
yeah. Give me that.
So other news here. Halloween ends.
Hold on. I
What?
got trailers for when I saw Halloween Ends for is it Pray for Me or Pray for Us?
Pray for the devil.
Pray for the Devil, yeah.
Yeah.
That and Bones and All,
Mhm.
which gave me like near dark vibes.
Yeah, I saw it at Fantastic Fest.
Oh, and
It's probably my favorite movie of the year.
Ooh, nice.
this
Luca,
year's so stacked.
yeah, I know. Well, I know, like it's my favorite overall movie. I think if I'm gonna go a movie that's like strictly horror, X is still like the top of that
Mhm.
list. But Luca never fails to just destroy me emotionally. And I thought I was good until like I wasn't. And then I was like, oh my God, I'm like crying and I'm a total mess. But it was wonderful. Like it was just, there's definitely some very near dark-esque aspects of it. But in a very nice kind of way.
Yeah. nothing wrong with
For
that.
me, yeah, I was just glad because I fell in love with Taylor Russell through the escape room movies.
Mhm.
And
are
I
good
am
movies.
so excited for people to fall in love with her through this movie because I think this is going to be the movie that changes like her career.
Yeah, we are in a wealth of horror movie time. Like this is going to be one of those, like, we talk about like 1982, like, oh man, 1982 was this huge year for horror. I think in 20 years, we're going to be talking about 2022 is like, remember that year because there's so much stuff coming out.
Yeah.
And not just, there's a million streaming releases always, and some of them are actually really good. But there's just a ton of like in theater stuff that's horror's making a ton of money right now. Like I was gonna say Halloween Ends little underperformed what they were expecting, but it made back its budget in the first weekend, even with that day and date thing where it was released on Paramount Plus. They made $41.3 million in
Yeah.
the first weekend. Even
What
with
was the budget?
Real quick, that was Peacock, actually. Sorry.
oh Peacock, thank you.
There's like 55 different streaming
There's so
services
many.
now, so I get
can't
it.
keep up. But yeah, no, yeah. They released it on Peacock at the same time. So, you didn't have to leave the house to watch it, but it still made $41 million this weekend. And I think the budget was like 30 million. So they've already made money. I will say it has a 41% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. Well, we're gonna know that later.
I haven't written my review yet for it because I didn't. What I want to talk about with it is so spoilery that I just
Mhm.
I couldn't
Mhm.
go and just give a generic like, here's my review of Halloween Ends. It just wasn't going to work for me. So I'm actually, after we're done here tonight, I'm going to be working on that because there's just like I didn't know how I felt about it the first time I saw it. When I saw it the second time, there are some certain things about it that really clicked in ways I wasn't expecting. And I remember we actually finished watching it at like 2:15 in the morning and then talked about it for like another 90 minutes. And I was like, I got to go to bed. I have to be up for work in like 5 hours. But for anybody who's sort of on the fence about it, I highly recommend watching it a second time because I think whichever way you're going to go with it, you'll know that second time,
Mhm.
whichever way.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's really fascinating. In fact, my other half went to go to the grocery store today and he was wearing a Halloween Resurrection shirt and our neighbor stopped him and he was like, dude, Halloween Ends. And they literally like stopped and talked for like 20 minutes about it because I think this is a movie that makes people actually talk about it. Where I don't think Kills did that at all. Kills was just everybody chanting Evil Dies Tonight. So for better or for worse, it's got that going for it.
Yeah, no, it's we'll get into it more later when we do our review, but I can say after my first watch, I'm in that boat of like, I don't know how I feel. I'm going to watch it again before we talk about it because
Yeah,
I'm going to have to.
definitely.
I'm going to have to.
Yes. I'm going to say something to you once we're all done.
Right. We
to give
can
you
talk
like
about
a
that.
nugget of perspective, and then go watch it with that in mind. And
Okay.
I'm curious if that'll change things for you.
Can we all just say that Darcy cameo?
Yeah.
I was like the only one that cheered at that, and everyone kind of looked at me like, "What? It's reception."
I was the only person who cheered at that at the critic screening. And then also I literally when it opens, and this isn't really a spoiler because it's the opening credits, but it opens with the Halloween 3 credits, and I
Mhm.
gasped like really loudly in the theater, and like where people actually looked at me, but nobody else reacted to it. And I was like, oh, I'm sitting in the theater with the wrong people for
Yeah,
this.
I knew it was obviously the different font, but I couldn't place it until I looked it up afterwards.
Yeah,
No,
it's that.
it's funny being a horror person in the middle of like an event horror movie where all the non-horror people come, because you have all of these things that you're like, oh wow, they're doing that, and other people just don't get it, don't understand what's happening there. So
Yeah.
I mean, more the merrier. I want more people
Yeah.
to watch horror movies. I'm not gatekeeping at all.
No.
If you never watch one except for in October, watch a bunch in October. Have a great time.
I mean, and I think for all of us, like there's movies that we all grew up with or got introduced to at some point in our lives where you go back and rewatch it after a few years and stuff, and you're always rediscovering new stuff.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
and that's just how it goes. Like, because your perspective is always changing, your base of knowledge is always going to change and evolve the more you watch everything. So, you know, it's it's okay if you're somebody coming in a Halloween Ends and you don't get all of the little nerdy parts.
Sure.
Because probably in a few more years, if you stick with all this stuff, that you're going to pick up on that stuff a lot more than. So, you know.
Victor, do you got any more news?
Yeah, two more little mini
Okay.
bits. There's not a lot of information here, but Dario Argento's Phenomena is getting a sequel. That's crazy.
Is that the one he's doing with Isabelle Huppert?
I don't know. All I could find was that it's being made by the Italian studio Titanus or
Oh, okay.
Titanus, and a U.S. production company called The Exchange that made VHS 99. But that's all I could find about it. So it's going to be a like joint Italian U.S. production, but that I don't know anymore. You probably have better sources than I do.
No, the only reason I asked that is I saw some tweet, because again, it's like I just sort of catch little tidbits here and
Yeah.
there. But I saw somebody had mentioned on Twitter that the next Dario Argento movie, he was working with Isabelle Huppert, and I was like, whoa,
cool.
okay,
Yeah.
that's freaking awesome. Like, yes.
And the last bit, and this one is literally in the like they're shopping it around kind of thing, but they're trying to make a Wicker Man TV show.
I saw, and was it Andy Serkis was attached?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay.
So I love Wicker Man and I love Phenomena.
I'm
I don't know where
curious-
these projects are going to go, but I'm down to follow them because I love the originals enough.
Well, that's the weird thing, because Wicker Man is very like a roller coaster kind of movie where it's like heading towards a point. Like
Yeah.
it's just like driving towards a very specific points. I'm curious how you make that into a series, but okay, sure.
I mean, the
If
nice
every-
thing about a series is it gives it a little more room to breathe. I could stay on Summer's Isle for like a 10-hour series. That'd be totally fine with me.
So,
So
like every season someone gets wickered. It just every season leads up to that.
if they can keep the vibe of the original movie, even if it's not the exact kind of same thing, but it's just that vibe, I just love the Wicker Man. I love being in that world for a little while.
If they did like a more serious remake, I could definitely see Andy Serkis as like the Christopher Lee role. I could totally see that.
Yeah, that's all
right.
I got. Some of it tidbits of information to be expanded on later.
All right. Thank you, Jody. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit expanded for the data device ending section. We did put out a appeal on Instagram for some questions, so we've got a few I'm going to read from. This one is, has there ever been a plot or theme that's a deal breaker for you? And I was thinking about this. I don't think per se, like in the of itself, a killer or a plot or a theme. It's more about how it's handled. So, I mean, slight spoilers for Barbarian, but you know, there is an element of sexual assault in that movie, quite a bit of it, but I think it handles it extremely deftly, where you don't feel like it's being exploited. You don't feel like it's putting an actress through unnecessary acting trauma or anything. I feel like it does it very respectfully. It tells you exactly what you need to know, gives you the exact vibe you need to know, but without being explicit to the point where you feel like the filmmaker is like trying to reenact something or like, you know, play out his own personal fantasy like some movies do. So I don't think anything is off the table, at least for me, as long as it's handled well.
Yeah, I can't think of anything that would be like an instant deal breaker for me. I'm pretty open to try just about anything. There are some movies that I'm probably never going to watch, not because like I hate the theme so much, but just because it doesn't interest me, or maybe I've heard enough to know that it's just kind of exploitive shock kind of value. Like I'm never going to watch a Serbian film. I have no interest in a Serbian film. I'm never going to watch Megan is Missing. Sorry, TikTok, for all your excitement about it. I'm never going to watch it. Not because it's too much. I'm not interested in
Yeah.
it. I don't want to watch it.
Like if a movie wanted to have a Nazi or a neo-Nazi as their protagonist and think that they can do it in the way that justifies it, I would watch that. It'd be very, very hard sell for me. But
yeah.
if they think they can do it, now they're just doing it to be edgelordy or something.
I think if something is just edgelordy, maybe that's my thing. Like if it just feels like, oh, look how shocking we can be. That's not entertaining to me. That's not interesting to me at this point in my life. I lived through my teen years already. Like I don't need any of that.
Heather, do you have an opinion?
Yeah, it was funny. I was actually having this conversation about the Nightmare remake and sort of things with that. And I think for me, it's like pedophilia.
Yeah.
Just isn't like something like I think there's a reason, like if, for example, in like the original Nightmare, why they got rid of that aspect of the character of Freddy Krueger. Not because I think Wes ever wanted you to root for him, but I think they've just realized it was a bridge too far. And I think there was some real life cases that were happening at the time that movie was released, that they realized like, oh, maybe we just don't need to go there with this, with sort of this roller coastery type horror movie, that it might sort of demean the things that these people are really going through. And then because AMC for some reason always plays the Nightmare remake like 100 times every October. And I mean, and I'll still watch it because it's on, and I'll just leave AMC on all day while I'm working. But it's like, I just realized that like one of the biggest issues that keeps me from like, I don't hate the Nightmare remake the way some people hate the Nightmare remake. But I think what keeps me from like truly enjoying the Nightmare remake is the whole aspect of Freddy Krueger's backstory. Because at first it's like, well, no, the kids lied about it, which then I feel like that's a whole thing. And then it's like, oh wait, no, they were really telling the truth. And then it's like, oh, okay, now where it's even grosser. Like it almost would have made sense if they were lying about it, because then it's like, okay, that's why he's coming back to kill him. But then this is just like, insult to injury at that point, and that's just not a fun thing to explore for me. So
it feels like something that they added to make it more edgy or grim dark kind of stuff, and it just makes it gross. Like
and it's like, I don't need to see Jackie Earl Haley play that character again after Little Children. Like I was just like, I don't need that. I mean, I get that maybe perhaps if they were trying to be a little more in line with what the original character was supposed to be, but it's like, if it wasn't going to work back then, I don't know why you think it's going to work now. Like there's nothing that's changed.
I think the point is that you can have that as a theme in your movie if it serves the overall film, but not to just be shocking. So like I was thinking about another movie, was it Split? That's an aspect of it, but it serves the larger purpose of the movie, and it's not, I don't feel like it goes anywhere too
and
uncomfortable.
At least with Split, they're not trying to tie it to a character that's like basically a pop culture anti-hero.
Yes, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like you're asking people to go collect like toys that are a pedophile. Like it's a really big ask for people. So I was like, wow, I mean, for all the issues, like I love that cast though, which is like, it's so hard for me to be just completely against it, but there's always a part in that movie where I'm just like, oh, I'm gonna feel icky now. I'm like, is there anything else on? But it's hard to like argue with the talents of like Rooney Mara or Thomas Dekker or Kyle Gallner, at the same time. But I actually did the set visit for that movie way back in the day. Cool. And Sam Bayer basically in the first like 3 minutes of meeting us said how there was never a good Nightmare on Elm Street movie. So he was trying to make the first good Nightmare on Elm Street movie. And I remember looking at the other press people and we were like, oh, this isn't
Excuse
gonna
me?
go well. So
Yeah.
yeah. So we should have known right then and there we were in trouble.
That's
Oh,
when somebody
that's-
says everything that everyone loved about these other movies, that's all garbage. We're not going to do any of that. That's
Yeah, that was pretty much it, honestly. So
Mm.
yeah, I should have known at that point that we were in trouble. But I was like, oh, they're making a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, and it's like, oh, it's back in Chicago, and I get to go travel home, and this is kind of fun. And then I was like, oh no, never mind. So
Yeah, that's when you need to keep your thoughts to yourself.
yeah,
Yeah.
you know, or you talk to a publicist to have them prepare statements
Mhm.
for you to make that are
Right.
going to appeal to the audience of people that you're talking to. And we were all horror press. So
Yeah.
right.
you'd think. So but yeah,
Um,
that's kind of like my deal breaker. Anything else, like I'm pretty much, you know, I can stomach it for the most part. I've never been able to get through Cannibal Holocaust just because I think I've built
Yeah.
it up in my head too much. But I did
Mhm.
the same thing with Martyrs, and I finally watched that a few years ago. So maybe next year
Martyrs
my
is one of those
Cannibal Holocaust
movies
year.
I really like, but I never want to see again. I
Yeah,
really
I
like
mean,
and
yeah.
appreciate that movie, but never again.
Oh yeah, that movie like completely restructured my soul after
Mhm.
seeing it. But I don't know that I want to sit through it again for a
Yeah.
while.
I did
Probably
rewatch it
at
like
least
10
more
years. Yeah, I did watch it 10 years later. I'm like, okay, I'm good for another 10, 15 years. But I
Yeah.
would, it's one of those movies, if you think you can handle it, I'd recommend watching it once.
Yeah.
If you think you got the chops for it.
Well, that's what I would say about Cannibal Holocaust
Yeah,
too. I
that
think
too.
it's actually a really good movie if you can handle, or if you can find the one that cuts out all the animal stuff, because
That's
that
the one
version
I'm
does
looking
exist.
for.
I think
Yeah.
that's the one on Shudder. So
It is, yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So speaking of remakes, we got another question. Thoughts on the Hellraiser remake?
I haven't watched yet, so I
Oh.
can't say anything yet. But go
I-
ahead, talk about it. It's fine.
I'll go ahead and promote that I did talk about this movie on the Shiver podcast. So you can see all my thoughts there. I liked parts of it. I liked some of the concepts. I did not like the cast, and some of the plot stuff did not make much sense. And I thought there's ways they could have really fixed it without too much effort. But I liked that it was better than 7 of the other Hellraiser movies. So that's my very mini review. It's definitely worth watching. Still has flaws, but still a much better movie than we've seen in a long time for that franchise.
I actually really liked it. To be honest, I felt like it was a little long.
Yeah.
I think there was 20 minutes you definitely could have cut out of there.
Mhm.
I actually did like the cast. Honestly, I'm a sucker. You put Gordon Vishnick in anything, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
okay, cool. Like,
Him and all the Cenobites were my favorite characters.
yeah, definitely. And I think
I didn't like. I think I just didn't like the lead very much.
oh, I liked her, but I mean, everybody else is super predictable, I think, in terms of
Mhm.
just how they move around. And I won't go into like spoilers or anything like that since Judy, you haven't seen it. But I really liked the design of everything because I liked
Yes.
how it felt like it sort of was manipulated flesh. I thought that was pretty cool. I liked the little touch of the jeweling on the ends of the pins and stuff because it felt more in line with like what Clive originally had envisioned. I saw a really interesting theory, and this has no spoilers in terms of the movie itself. But somebody had theorized that the female priest in this is actually Kirsty,
Ooh.
because that was a storyline in one of the comics where Elliot Spencer gave her up to reclaim his humanity, and she became the new hell priest.
That I would totally been down for that.
And so I think that's really interesting. I don't necessarily buy that particularly, but I love that theory.
Wait, Christy or Julia?
Kirsty.
Okay.
Yeah, that was like a thing from the comics where he decided to like somehow, I don't remember exactly how it worked out because I've never actually read the comics, but somebody had posted some of the panels and stuff, and I was reading this thread and I thought that was really interesting. I was like, oh, that's kind of
No,
cool. But
that's
then at
very-
the same time, then why not have Ashley Lawrence come
Yeah.
back?
No,
But
I would
you know,
much rather have Julia come back.
oh, Julia's
she's one
like
of my
the best.
favorite. Yeah.
Oh,
she's
she
so
was like one of my
underrated.
favorite villains growing up. Like,
Yeah.
oh my God, between like 2. Oh gosh.
Mhm.
I,
Two is
I
one of my-
love her too.
I think 2 is probably the best movie in that series.
I think so too.
Yeah.
All right,
So-
we'll do one more question, and it's again the traditional. What is your favorite Tales from the Crypt episodes? They say top 5, but what's your off the top of your head? Did you look up your answers?
I did. So it's funny that you mentioned The Reluctant Vampire.
Mhm.
Because that is one of mine, because I'm a sucker for sort of atypical vampire stories.
Yeah.
I think that was because of my love of Near Dark growing up.
Mhm.
And so this one for me, I thought was really interesting when we mentioned
Elliot,
Elliot, you know,
Silverstein.
who worked Silverstein, who worked on it. Because the reason I remember just being completely enamored with it was because of Malcolm McDowell in it. And I
Yes.
also thought it was really interesting that Michael Berryman, because it was in it as well, because at that point I had just discovered, oh my
Those Love
gosh,
Eyes.
yes, I can't believe I
Yeah.
forget that. I'm on a freaking Craven podcast. And I was just like, wait, what? Like, okay, this is so strange. But I really liked that one. And if I'm remembering correctly, I believe it was George Wendt was in that one too, wasn't he?
Yep.
Okay. I was, because in my head it looks like I know George Wendt's in one of the House movies and what's his face is in the other one. And I was like, wait, am I getting my House and my Tales in the Crypt things mixed up? Because I think they both did episodes at some point. Maybe I'm crazy on that, but I feel like
No, they did.
Okay. I just love that Norm and
Cliff.
Cliff were like, they'd always sort of like be in the same circles, but never at the same time. So I just thought that was fascinating, especially in horror. So that was one I loved. I'm a pretty I guess very run-of-the-mill horror fan, where I think all through the house is one that I watch a lot
Oh, I
every
love that one.
holiday season, because like it's so good and so not what you're expecting. And you know, so that's, I think most horror fans will always talk about that one. So that's another one that I've always been sort of a big fan of. And then I was trying to think of like other ones, but I remember there's the one that's with Bobcat Goldthwait.
That's a ventriloquist dummy.
Yeah, and I think the reason I love that one so much is that I didn't realize until recently that not only is it directed by Richard Donner, who is like, you know, a legend, but it was also written by Frank Darabont, who's, you know, not only written some of the best TV of, you know, episodes of anything that we've seen, but also, you know, has directed some of the very best Stephen King adaptations as well. So I think that's another reason that one always kind of stuck out to me. Plus, I used to love Don Rickles. I know that sounds so stupid and so old-timey.
No, he's awesome.
But it's just like, I used to love Don Rickles like so much. And so that one always kind of stuck out to me, because I was also like a huge Police Academy person. So yeah, those were kind of like my big three, I think. You know, and there was like, I know like Tom Allen did like a really fun episode that I'm totally blanking on, but I remember being excited because I was a big Fright Night fan when he went over there and did stuff. But I think that's what's like so cool. I think about like going back and rewatching Tales from the Crypt, or even just like a lot of these like monsters or Freddy's Nightmares, is like finding these things that like your favorite directors like did in their like off time. And like really getting to like see them do things that like are just so atypical sometimes, where, you know, I don't know, it's just like a fun discovery for me. So, but
Tom Holland did Four-Sided Triangle, the one with Patricia Arquette's.
Yes,
she's on the farm. It's the very Pearl. When you think about it,
it's a really cool one.
Pearl.
I like that one.
And he also did Lover Come Hack to Me with Man the Plumber.
Nice. Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah. Now that I think about it, Four-Sided Triangle did contribute a lot to Pearl, I think.
Yeah. No, it definitely. I like that one a lot. Yeah, I think when I talk about favorites now, after we've done this show for so long, weirdly enough, I think one of my favorites is one that I just recently watched for the first time for this show. The Death of Some Salesman is one of the, like, it gets the humor and the nastiness and the gore, and like it's a fun one, man. I love that one a lot. That's the one that Tim Curry plays like an entire family of people. He plays the mom, the dad, and the daughter.
Yeah, Heather, if you haven't seen that one, we highly recommend that one.
No, that one I know. That's like the beginning of season 5, which I missed, and I can't believe I would miss a Tim Curry episode. So now I'm gonna have to go back and find that and watch that.
Yeah, we have a great making of segment we did with the director and writer of that episode too. So that's a good like amendum compendium.
That's awesome.
That one. Yeah, I did a quick list of mine, and the numbering of these always changes. My number one is always yellow. That's my number one. But then the other ones I always go for top billing, new arrival, just because it scared me so much. Dig That Cat in Dead Right, the one with Demi Moore.
Yeah,
That's for today. That's it. It changes every day.
Yeah, every time a question like this comes up, I start browsing back through episodes and I'm like, oh, that one's good. Oh, that one's good. And I can't. I have trouble narrowing it down. I just really love Death of Some Salesman. So I'll keep that up there for now.
All right. And then to round things out, Heather, obviously you're here. Thank you for coming on. And we want to hear more about your book. And this is actually the perfect episode to talk about makeup and effects.
I know. I kind of now like hearing about the comic. I'm like, why couldn't the episode mimic the comic a little bit more closely? Because that would have been pretty awesome. But yeah, no. Sorry, I reached over to scratch my leg, and I was like, oh, I'm actually talking. I should probably sit up. I'm not used to these things where like we're used to like work meetings where I can like click off and stuff. But yeah, so October 26th is the release date for Monsters Makeup and Effects Volume 2. This is a series I've been working on now for like 6.5 years. I basically, when I first started out, it was just sort of a thing where like I wanted to get 20 different special effects artists to talk about their careers because most people never really ask them about that kind of stuff. And mostly when people were interviewing effects people, it was like, well, how did you make this? How did you make that? And it was never like about their lives or their experiences and, you know, the things that they, you know, gave up to basically give us the world, you know, through their creations. And if you think about it, like if you're a horror fan, like most of the reasons that we end up falling in love with horror in the first place is because there is some character or creature that caught our imagination, you know, and that's what like drew us in and got us interested in this stuff in the first place. So yeah, so the first book came out last October, and this one we just decided to mix. I wanted to mix up the formula a little bit because everything is sort of this. It's a presented conversational style because one, I didn't want to center myself in these books very much because it isn't about me. It's about these artists, and so I didn't feel the need to get super flourishy with throwing in big fancy words and things like that. I wanted to center what these people talked about as the reason to read this. I don't need anybody to be impressed with my use of adjectives and things like that. So we decided to sort of format it in that way. But this one is a little different because one of the chapters that we did is actually a tribute. And it's a tribute to John Carl Buechler, who, for anybody who doesn't know, like he directed Troll 2, he did Friday 7, a master effects guy who's hugely important for a lot of reasons. But one of the biggest reasons I wanted to include him in this is because I would say in about 80% of the interviews that I did with all of these different people, and I've talked to like 83 different people now, he was a guy that came up almost in every single conversation as the person who gave everybody their break into the business.
Nice.
And he was that guy. He was the guy where if you needed to get in there, learn how to do these things, get that hands-on experience, be a part of a shop, understand how the business works, his door was always open. And he really was very one of a kind in that way, where he gave everybody a shot. And he was super generous with his time, super generous with his resources. In fact, there was one of the people that I actually included in this isn't an effects person, but it is somebody who worked with John for years, who is Kane Hodder. And Kane talked about how there were times when there wouldn't be money coming in to their shop, but John would just take out like a mortgage, you know, a second mortgage on his house and things like that to keep people paid. Which isn't typically what most shop people do. Like basically, if there's no jobs, you close down for a few months and people have to go out and find work. But that wasn't who Buechler was. And so I just wanted to take a moment to sort of appreciate him and his career and his legacy, because he was somebody when I first started off doing all this in 2016 that I did reach out to, and we just couldn't make it work. And then we lost him. And I didn't want that to sort of be the end of it, because I felt like he still deserved to be a part of this. And then also for a different interview, I had to sort of do it a little more Q&A style, which bugs me because I feel like that's sort of cheating in a way. But Chris Wallace, I think pretty much everybody kind of knows at this point, like he has hearing issues.
Mm.
So he's not able to do typical phone interviews and things like that anymore. So we had to do a back and forth, gosh, that maybe spanned the course of like a year and a half of going back and forth on all these different things that he's done throughout his career. So that one's formatted a little differently than the others as well. But it wasn't like I wanted to exclude him because I couldn't do it the same way that I've done the others.
Yeah.
And frankly, he was one of the biggest reasons I fell in love with special effects as a kid.
Oh yeah, he's got an amazing resume.
Like the minute I saw Gremlins, I was like, oh yeah. And then of course, like, and then I was obsessed with Enemy Mine as a kid. And then The Fly came along and completely obliterated me. So yeah, there was no way I was not going to include Chris Wayless in this. So, but it's been an amazing journey. Like for me, just being able to put the spotlight on so many talents. Like there's a lot of like people when they hear their names, are like, oh yeah, that person sounds familiar. People like Phil Tippett or Steve Wang, or somebody like Kazuhiro, who's, recently won 2 Oscars, or Chris Nelson, who, we talked about Halloween Ends, he's the guy who basically brought Michael Myers back to life for the new trilogy and things like that. But I wanted to also sort of put the spotlight on people who aren't as well known, because they have stories that deserve to be shared as well. So we have folks like John Dodds or Guy Himber, or even Stuart Conran, we talked about Hellraiser a little bit. He is a UK effects guy who actually got his start with Bob Keane. And like one of the very first movies he ever worked on was the original Hellraiser. And he worked on a bunch of Bob Keane movies, which included, Hellraiser 2 and Waxwork and things like that. And then eventually went on to work on like Shaun of the Dead and things like that. So really wanted to give people like a fun sort of spectrum of interviews, and it's going to continue. Like we're going to have some great Italian artists in the future, which I'm excited about. But it's all like geeky for me. Like I think when I started this off, it was just like, okay, what are the characters and what are the effects that I love? And then I would just go find these people and hope that they would talk to me. So when they did, it was just like, wait, you're really going to do this? This is crazy. So, and I still don't believe it. Like I've been living this series now forever, and I still don't believe that I'm actually doing this, but it's been a real pleasure. And for me, somebody said this past week, and I actually got emotional, because when you write stuff or you podcast or anything, you never know if it's like gonna make a difference. And somebody tweeted to me, and she said how she's reading book 1 right now, and every single chapter she learns something new, and how cool that is. And I just was like, oh my God, yes, thank you. Because I just never know, like if I'm saying stuff that everybody already knows. I just want people to fall in love with these artists the way that I did, and the way that I still do. Like even as I go through and write these stories and things like that, and just re-experience it, I'm just like, wow, this is really neat. Like you talked about Dick Tracy, and it was like that whole thing with like John Dodds and John Caglione Jr. Like they never would have been the go-to guys for that job. In fact, oh my gosh, why am I blanking on his name? Warren Beatty, like he met with like Rick Baker and Stan Winston and Rob Bottin and all the big guys in LA, and he brought in these guys from New York for a meeting, had a meeting with him basically in a towel. And the first question he was like, so what would you guys do to make this better? And they were like, what are you talking about? And he was so like on board with what the effects could bring to the table. And like, they even had like the DP like wanted to light things certain ways. And the FX guys are like, if you do that, this is all going to look like shit. Like we have to change it. And Warren Beatty backed them up. And like his DP, awesome. I'm forgetting his name but he's like a freaking legend. And he was like, no, like if we're spending all this money on these effects, they need to look great. You got to work with these guys. So yeah, so it's just like, when you said Dick Tracy, I was like, oh my God, I love, like, for me, that's like, I just love those big oversized,
little face
and that. Oh my God,
big face. I love that guy.
It's so cool. And again, it all looks amazing still.
Yeah, still looks amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, when we talked last year, you sent me the first book, and I read some chapters and everything, and the stories are what really brings it to life, because everybody could talk like, oh yeah, you did Gremlins, that was cool. But the fact that when you like talk about, I remember one that we talked about, like the CIA hired him to like help them like do
Tom Berman.
Yeah, the quick change makeups, like that's actually just camera tricks.
Yeah,
that was great stuff. And And then you sent, and then I heard you have another book coming out so quickly. I was like, wow, you're just a machine. But I'm like, I was thinking like, who's left to even talk about after all those great people? Then I'm looking at this one, I'm seeing Todd Masters, who I've talked to a handful of times, is a great guy. And like Chris Wallace and Phil Tippett. And it's just like, you just keep coming up with more and more and more. And I'm
I
like,
can't
okay.
believe I'm on a Tales from a Crypt episode and I forgot to drop Todd Masters' name here. Wow, he's gonna be so mad at me now. But yeah, no, Todd, like, oh my gosh. In fact, that's how I ended up meeting him. I just hit him up once years ago for an interview for Demon Knight because I did a big retrospective on it. Because God, those demons are amazing and the things that they were able to do with them and everything. And because I know Kevin Yeager, obviously Crypt Keeper guy. But it's Todd who did like all the other stuff. And so yeah, I mean, I might be able to tease that you might be seeing Kevin Yeager in a future book.
Nice.
So I can't remember if he's in 3 or 4, but he is, yeah. Kevin and I had a really great conversation. So yeah, and honestly, like it's one of those things where like I sit here and I'm like, holy shit, how did I do this? Like, not that I like accomplished it, but that I actually got to like talk and meet to these people. Like I held Michelle Burke's Oscar for Interview with the Vampire, which I thought was so cool.
Wow.
Or like the time, like when you were talking about Tom Berman's stories, like I was at their house and like I touched prosthetics from the original Planet of the Apes.
Oh,
like 7-year-old me was freaking out inside, who first found that movie on some rainy Saturday afternoon and decided to watch it. And not only fell in love with those apes, but Roddy McDowell. And then eventually, a few years later, I discovered Fright Night and be like, what? Well, like he was Cornelius, what the hell? Like, so it's just, for me, like, it's all full circle. Like I can't ever not come from this as I'm always going to come from like a professional journalism approach, but deep down, it's always because I'm a fan, because I love what these people do. I love what they contribute. And I just want to celebrate them the best way that I can. Yeah. And that's always what it's about. Like, I don't give a crap what it ends up going to meaning for me down the line. Like if somebody out there reads about Mike Elizalde, who's like this kid who grew up basically, in a not so great neighborhood in Los Angeles and was told by everybody, to forget your Hollywood dreams and things like that, who was actually a magician when he was a kid. And I actually think he's performed at Magic Castle too.
Oh, cool.
And here he is, like one of the biggest special effects artists out there who frequently collaborates with Guillermo. Like if I can get somebody to fall in love with his story, maybe that will inspire them to realize that like, yeah, life might seem impossible now, but maybe, if you keep at it at a certain way, like, there's a chance, So sorry, I got off on like
no,
that's
all great. And again, we encourage everyone to check out your volume 1 and now volume 2, and hopefully, you have a timeline. It's gonna be like an annual thing for volume 3 and 4.
Yeah, like I said, right now I've been working on this other project that's going to be announced, I think, in February or March. But yeah, the next 2, this will probably be out next October, and then the final one will be the following October.
Yeah, I mean, this is really awesomely geeky stuff, and that's what we're here for.
Well, thank you. It's one of those things where like sometimes I forget that I even get to I talk about some of the things I get to talk about, and then when I go back and I do work through these interviews, and I'm like, oh wow, this is so cool. Like honest to God, like I hate reading my own writing sometimes because we're just like, oh, this could have been better. But one of my favorite things is the Tony Gardner interview from book 1, because first of all, we talked for 4.5 hours and he went into everything and he's got some of the best stories ever. But like, to me, I'm like, this is a guy who was a movie geek, who was so determined to get into the industry that he stopped at nothing. Like he broke onto the Universal lot and pretended to be a person working at Universal just so he could try to get in front of Spielberg. Like that's how determined he was.
Speaking of Tony Gardner, I was with him last night.
So you went to Living with Chucky?
Yeah. So Tony Gardner has a daughter named Kira.
Yeah.
Who has a documentary coming out called Living with Chucky, and it's partly like a retrospective of the Chucky movies, like kind of like Never Sleep Again or the Crystal Lake Memories or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So that's like part of it is kind of going through the series, but it's also like about her and her relationship with all the people that are like in the Chucky family. And I kept thinking of that Fast and the Furious meme of Vin Diesel talking about family, and I just picture Chucky talking about family, and that's all like Don Mancini.
Now I need that, like with Chucky on Vin Diesel's head or body.
Yeah, exactly.
His family. Yeah, no,
yeah.
actually,
So I went to the screening last night in Hollywood, and actually I sat with Zoran from the Dead Meat podcast. We got to finally meet, and then she was there, Kai was there, her father obviously was there, so it was a really, really fun event. What a great
that's
time.
nice. Yeah,
That's awesome.
he actually, when right before she's getting ready to, I think, debut at Fantasia, Tony
Mhm.
texted me and he was like, "Hey, my daughter finished her doc. Would you want to talk to her?" And I was like, "Of course." And of course, it's Chucky, so I was already 100% on board there. And I thought it was really interesting too how she talked about like how her and Fiona sort of have sort of these parallel experiences because Brad is the voice of Chucky, but since Seed, like her
Since Seed,
dad
yeah.
has been the performer of Chucky in terms of the puppetry and things like that, which is interesting. And Tony also gets to kill himself in Seed, which I always think is really fun. So I'm really glad you got to go to that. It was funny because it was like I've been so slammed with school. I'm actually on the jury for Scream Fest.
Oh,
And I was
really?
like, oh, I really want to go. And then I just was like, oh gosh, I'm like, I had this project that was due like today. And I was like, all right, it's either go to that or, not turn in my project, which is like
Well,
30% of my grades. So I was like, I think I probably should do that.
in the most Hollywood LA thing possible, it took me over 45 minutes to get out of the parking garage. So,
That's Hollywood Highlands.
yeah, Hollywood Highlands.
Yeah,
was
that sounds about
crazy.
right on the weekends. Yes.
Oh,
It was fun too because they asked me to come out and do the jury because there's like a critics award this year. So
mhm.
they asked me to be on that jury. And for me, like when I first started off doing this, it was like 2007 and I was still living in Chicago. So one of the first things that I did when I first like embarked on this career is I actually would come out for Scream Fest.
Mm.
So the first one I flew myself out for was the 2007 Scream Fest. So it's really fun to like 15 years later, like kind of come full circle with that. And I was just so excited that she got accepted. And I ran into her at Fantastic Fest too. And so did she bring her Chucky with?
Oh,
Was he dressed-
there were
was he-
so many people carrying. It was like we were talking about there's just so many Chuckies walking around. Like there's like people security Chucky, like they were just holding it like it was nothing. It was really funny. Yeah, she was
Awesome.
having the time of her life. She was
Good.
just so much attention and everything, and she was.
That's
It's a
awesome.
really, really great film. So I'm really hoping it gets wide distribution very soon so everyone else can watch it.
Yeah, I think Yellow Veil picked it up, so they'll push it the right way. They know how to, because like they've done some really fun indie stuff over the last few years. So I think honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if it ends up going over to Shudder.
Yeah, that'd be the perfect place for it.
I mean, especially because Universal owns the Chucky series. Like, hello, put it together, make
Mhm.
magic.
Mhm.
That's my opinion, but
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that wraps up the episode. Heather, thanks so much for joining us. Where can people find
Absolutely.
Thank you. So you can find me over at dailydead.com. You can find me on Twitter at the Horror Chick. And to find out all about monsters, makeup, and effects, you can go over to amink.publishing.com. And you'll find out information if you click the Dark Ink section. That's where the information for both volumes of Monsters, Makeup, and Effects lives. Or, of course, we're also on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and the first one ended up on Walmart and Target too, which was so surreal. So,
you?
yeah, so that's pretty much where I'm at these days. And then, see, there goes my dog. She's like, "Oh, are you talking? I'm gonna bark now." And then also, really fun. I'm in the latest issue of Fangoria. I have 2 different bylines
Nice.
this time. So,
Like-
celebrating Smile and celebrating Wayne Toss, who is
Nice.
an FX
Awesome.
legend.
All right. Well, next week we will be reviewing Creep Course. We appreciate everyone for listening. We'd really appreciate it if you would give us a rating and review on iTunes, a rating on Spotify. Check out our Patreon for bonus content. And also check out our YouTube for videos of these podcasts and other bonus content. With that, we thank you for listening to Dads from the Crypt.
Follow Dads from the Crypt on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or I will follow you to the grave. No, seriously, you really should watch. But be careful what you ask for. You may get it.